Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going on a deep dive into the world of AuthorTube.
AuthorTube.
Yeah. You know that corner of YouTube where all the aspiring authors are, sharing tips and, getting inspiration and all that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
We're taking a look at this video essay today called What's Wrong with Writing Advice from a channel called The Unwanted Book Club.
Okay.
And this essay really had me thinking about some stuff, nodding along, but also questioning a few things I hadn't really thought much about before.
Interesting. It's kind of a meta topic, isn't it? Like looking at the advice itself.
Yeah.
Rather than just, taking the advice.
Exactly. And one of the things that really jumped out at me was just how formulaic a lot of the advice on AuthorTube is.
Okay.
It's like they all follow the same recipe, Catchy intro, a few tips, and then that call to action at the end.
Oh, I see what you mean.
I kind of started to think about it like those cooking shows. Where it's like they always have the same format.
Yep.
It can be helpful for learning the basics, but after a while, you kind of crave something more original,
Right. I get that.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting was how this essay kind of points out this shift from guidelines to like these hard and fast rules.
Mm-hmm.
Like, remember, way back in the day when AuthorTube was first starting to become a thing, a lot of those creators were really emphasizing like, hey, this is just what works for me,
A personal preference kind of thing.
Exactly. But it seems like something's changed.
Oh, interesting.
And there's this quote from the essay that I thought was really interesting. And they say, advice and tips are beginning to resemble a set of rules one must follow in the writing process. And they go on to say, now the videos are designed is almost to strict do's and don'ts.
So it's less about, hey, here's what worked for me, and more like, this is the way.
Yeah, exactly.
I see how that could be a problem, especially for new writers, right?
Wow, I know. And I think about it from the perspective of like any creative field. I mean, putting strict rules on a creative process, it just seems like it could really stifle experimentation.
Totally. It's like if everyone followed the same formula all the time.
Yeah.
Wouldn't all the books start to feel really samey?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there was another thing the essay talked about that I thought was really interesting, and it was this focus on plotting and planning.
Okay.
It seems like a lot of the advice on AuthorTube is really geared toward plotters.
The people who like to plan everything out in detail beforehand.
Yeah, like they've got their outlines.
Uh-huh.
And the essay even talks about people spending like months developing world building maps or like taking a whole year off to do research for a book.
Wow.
It's like that's a level of dedication that's really impressive, but it kind of completely overlooks all those other writing styles out there.
Like pantsing.
Yeah.
Riding by the seat of your pants and just seeing where it goes.
Exactly. And I feel like both of those approaches are totally valid, but it's almost like there's this pressure to be this meticulous plotter.
Right.
To be a real writer.
Yeah. Like if you don't plan everything out in detail, you're somehow doing it wrong.
Exactly. And, I actually fell into that trap myself when I first started writing.
Right.
I thought I had to have everything figured out before I even started writing.
Uh-huh.
And it took me a long time to realize that my best work comes from when I embrace that spontaneity and let myself be surprised by the story.
Oh, that's interesting.
What about you? Have you ever felt that pressure, like that plotter versus pantser thing?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think that's something a lot of writers struggle with.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in what other people are doing and start to feel like you're not doing it right if you're not following the same approach.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that there's no one right way to write a book.
That's so true.
What matters most is finding a process that works for you,
Yeah.
One that allows your creativity to really come through.
And that might mean breaking free from those perceived rules, right?
Absolutely. Sometimes the best stories come from embracing the unexpected.
I love that, embracing the unexpected.
Yeah.
It makes me think that maybe the real key to success as a writer isn't about rigidly sticking to some formula, but it's about finding your own path and trusting your own instincts.
It's about giving yourself permission to experiment, to make mistakes, to figure out what works for you.
Yeah.
That's where the real magic happens, I think. And, speaking of pressure, there's another thing this essay brings up, and it's this whole focus on sales.
Oh, yeah.
Over artistic growth, Like it's this underlying message in so much of the AuthorTube content that the ultimate goal is just to sell a ton of books.
Right.
Even if it means sacrificing,
the art
or the originality or taking those shortcuts with your craft.
Yeah, right? And that's something that really resonated with me too, It's like the creative process itself almost becomes secondary to like chasing commercial success.
Yeah.
And there's this one quote that really stood out to me.
Oh, yeah.
They say, the goal in mind, expected to be that of every writer, is how do I get my books to sell? Instead, we should ask ourselves, what will make my story great? How can I make my next story greater?
Wow.
And it's like, Have we forgotten that storytelling should be about connecting with readers?
Right.
Not just like hitting the bestseller list.
It is a tricky thing, though, isn't it? Because you do have that practical side of it.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you got to make a living as a writer.
You do.
But then there's the artistic side.
Yeah.
And the integrity of creating something you're really proud of.
Right.
That's a tough balance, you know?
It is. It is. And I think it's like there's this fear that if you don't follow the market trends and if you don't write what's selling, you're never going to find an audience.
Right.
But then I wonder if that kind of thinking actually stifles creativity in the long run.
I think it can, for sure. Yeah. It definitely can.
I know. Like when I first started writing, I was so caught up in trying to write the next big thing.
That I completely lost sight of, like,
your own story.
what I actually wanted to say.
That might make sense.
Yeah. What about you? Have you ever experienced that pressure, you know?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think it's really easy to fall into that trap, you know? Not just for writers either. I think a lot of creative people struggle with that. The idea that you have to, you know, chase after success and recognition. Instead of focusing on the joy of the creative process. But at the end of the day, I think the most fulfilling work comes from, you know, that place of authenticity and passion, right?
Absolutely.
If you're only writing to chase trends, you're probably going to end up feeling pretty empty.
You know, and I thought it was really interesting, even with all the critiques that this essay makes.
They
don't totally dismiss AuthorTube.
No.
And they actually end the video with this really powerful message, which is the best way to learn how to write is to just write.
Ooh, I like that. Simple, but very true. Yeah. It's so true. It's like you can watch all the tutorials, read all the books, listen to all the advice.
Right.
But until you actually sit down, do it, you're not really going to learn.
It's like learning to ride a bike. Right.
Yeah.
You can read about it all you want, but until you actually get on and start pedaling, you're not going to get anywhere.
And I think that's where the essayist's real call to action is find your own way, you know.
Oh, I see.
Don't be afraid to break the rules. Experiment. Discover what works for you as a writer.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important message.
It is.
Because it's not just about, you know, the craft of writing. It's about finding your place in the community.
Yes.
Figuring out where you fit in and who you want to connect with.
That's so true.
How you want to share your work with the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a bigger picture kind of thing, you know.
And maybe it's about not taking any one piece of advice as like the ultimate truth, but more like using it as a starting point.
The jumping off point.
Figure out what works for you.
Exactly. Be open to different ideas, but ultimately trust your gut.
Yes.
You know. Follow your own creative path.
It's so easy to get caught up, you know, comparing yourself to other writers and feeling like you're just not good enough.
Oh, for sure.
But I think what this essay is really getting at is that the true measure of success isn't about hitting the bestseller list or, you know, getting all the awards and stuff. It's really about
staying true to yourself.
Staying true to your vision. Yeah,
and creating something that you're really proud of.
Exactly.
You know, at the end of the day, that's what matters.
It is.
It reminds me of this thing I read the other day about how, you know, the creative process is really a journey of self-discovery.
Oh, yeah.
Like you're exploring your own, you know, inner landscape and giving a voice to those stories that only you can tell.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah. And it brings us back to that core message of the video essay, right? Finding your own way as a writer. It's not about just blindly following someone else's blueprint.
Right.
It's about, you know, developing your own critical eye. And figuring out what really resonates with your own creative instincts.
It's like becoming your own best teacher. You know, pay attention to what gets you excited, what makes you want to write, what feels right for you. That's what matters.
That might even mean stepping outside your comfort zone.
Oh, for sure. Experimenting, trying new things, maybe even breaking some of those rules you picked up along the way.
Exactly. It's like, you know, that plotter versus pantser thing we were talking about before. Maybe the real lesson is that there are no rules, you know?
No hard and fast rules,
Just got to find what works for you.
Right. And give yourself permission to change as you go. You know, grow as a writer.
That's so important.
And what's really interesting about this idea of finding your own way is that it's not just about the craft of writing.
Oh, okay.
It's also about, you know, finding your way in the community.
Oh, yeah.
Where do you fit in? Who's your audience?
Right.
How do you want to share your work with the world?
Exactly,
It's a big thing, you know? It's a journey.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
So, you know, I guess to kind of wrap up what we've learned from this deep dive.
Yeah, let's do a little recap.
Into AuthorTube and the whole world of writing advice advice, we talked about how a lot of the advice can feel very formulaic.
Right.
And how you have to be careful about anyone who claims to have the one right way to do things.
It's all about perspective.
Yeah.
And what works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly.
We also talked about how, that focus on sales and the market can sometimes,
overshadow the art.
Overshadow the joy of creating something just for the love of it.
Yeah.
And we also talked about,
plotter versus pantser.
That whole plotter versus pantser debate, right? And how some people might feel limited by, that emphasis on planning.
But I think ultimately the biggest takeaway for me is that it's all about finding your own way.
Finding your own way, yeah.
Experimenting, taking those risks, and just trusting your gut.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
Imagine you could go back in time.
Ooh.
And give one piece of advice to your past self.
Interesting.
What would you say?
Oh, that's a good one. Makes you think, huh?
Yeah. Think about all the things you struggled with.
Right.
The doubts, the lessons you've learned along the way.
All those bumps in the road.
Yeah, exactly. What's that one nugget of wisdom you wish you had known from the very beginning?
I like that.
Yeah.
A good question to ponder for sure.
Yeah. And as you continue on your own writing journey, remember to embrace your unique voice, trust your instincts, and never stop exploring.
Beautiful.
Happy writing, everyone.